appeal to nature is also commonly, I believe, what most people fall back to when they hear someone arguing for the vegan lifestyle. When someone's saying, I think we should just leave animals alone, we can be healthy without eating animal products, right? We can get all the vitamins we need from plants, and vitamin B12 comes from bacteria. And, look at all these vegan athletes that are, gold medal winning, top of their game. Obviously, they're not deficient in any nutrients or, lacking in energy or strength or anything like that. Obviously, you can be very healthy as a vegan. So since animals are sentient, feel pain, have emotions, and want to live, why don't we just leave them alone? Like, why don't we just follow the golden rule? It's, pretty simple. Why don't we just be decent towards animals and leave them alone? On top of it just being the ethical thing to do, this would solve a lot of environmental problems too. And even human problems, right? Instead of giving all this grain to animals, we could give them directly to hungry people, right? So all kinds of benefits, all kinds of sound reasoning, all discarded because of someone's appeal to nature. Because, yeah, but it's natural, I was just watching a nature show and I saw, these lions killing these gazelles. So, it's natural, So again, it's like throwing away all ethics, all logic, just because it's natural. Again, just because something is natural doesn't necessarily mean it's beneficial, doesn't mean it's good. People have this idea that, like, well, it wouldn't be there. It's like the same as fear. Well, why is fear there if it doesn't serve any purpose? That doesn't make sense. Well, it doesn't make sense to you, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a reason, right? For example, perhaps it's there for you to reject, right? We have free will here as human beings on the planet. And perhaps if you have some kind of religious or even agnostic perspective, you might consider the possibility that evil things, bad things are put before us as a choice, right? We have the free will to choose. So you can choose fear or you can choose courage. You can choose to be like a lion or you can choose to be like an herbivore, right? A lot of times people look at, like, again, with the nature shows with like insects, and they're like, oh, look at this crazy stuff these insects do and all this super gruesome, it's like something out of a horror movie. And they're just like, oh, it's disgusting and that's wicked. But then at the same time, they kind of maybe subconsciously use that as a justification for when they go to the fast food place and order a hamburger. Because they're like, well, I'm not doing anything worse than that insect I just saw on that nature show, or I'm not doing anything worse than the lion or the tiger, right? So they just think, well, because it's natural, because there's all this violence going on in nature, I'm just going to ignore all the herbivores. I'm just going to pretend they don't exist, and I'm just going to ignore the fact that the human body is obviously perfectly healthy on an herbivore diet. I'm just going to ignore all that, and I'm going to focus irrationally on these violent and gruesome acts in nature and use them as a moral justification. I'm going to make that my moral baseline. I'm going to look at the most horrific violence in the world and say, you know what? I think that should be my moral standard, right? It's absurd, and you may not have realized how absurd it is unless someone pointed it out to you, as I'm doing now. Rather than listening to what Jesus said, which is that love is the law, right? That's what we're commanded to do, right? The greatest commandments, to love God, love others, and love ourselves, others including sentient beings like animals. Rather than that being your moral foundation, as I would recommend, as I think makes a whole lot more sense, you're looking at violent behavior of animals and saying, well, if it occurs in nature, it must be good. If it occurs externally, in the savannah, well, then it must be okay. And if it occurs internally, like fear or anger, well, then that must be okay too. Like, it's a very, I guess, simplistic view, as well as it being irrational. And it's also amoral, right? It's like, where is your moral lens? You're just saying, well, if it exists, it's good, right? That's extremely lazy, morally speaking, right? Like, you have like no moral judgment, right? You're just saying, well, if it exists, it must be good, and not considering the possibility that just because God created certain things, or that God allows for certain things, or if you don't believe in God, just because if you just think, well, if it exists in nature, it must have served some so-called evolutionary purpose and therefore be good. You're throwing away ethics and replacing it with nature, right? You're throwing away the law of love, you're throwing away the non-aggression principle, and replacing it with nature equals good, right? Like, nature equals moral law, which is irrational. It's not true. Related to this is people throwing away the non-aggression principle, or what you can call the law of love as well. It's just, two different ways of looking at it, at the same law, and saying, well, if it's a law, like a law written by humans, well, then it must be good, right? Even though that makes no sense whatsoever, and we can point to all kinds of examples throughout history where there were, laws written on the books that were not morally good.